If he would have quit working, he would have fell under. Even though he was a Hollywood actor, he had credits, he was making decent money, but because of the treatment he was under, he couldn't quit working, and there was no way. I got a 5-year emergency fund. So when you're going to a financial plan, that's saying you get 6 months to a year. That's great. Emergency fund, something is better than nothing. The challenge is that um, if you have something that's in a medical emergency where it's going to be long term, like colon cancer, where you have to continue to get treatment, you're going to have to figure out how to work and still get treatment. You may not be in a situation where I can sit home for the next 4 years and just get treatment. And that's what I want people to understand. A lot of financial planning is based around the best case scenario. I got a year of money sitting up and I'm not going to get sick. Well, what if you do get sick? Would a year of money be enough for you not to have to go to work while you get your treatment? Can your job, will they keep you on the job if you take a year off? Because what if you take a year off of work and they say, well, you know what, that you're fired because you can't not work for a year, right? Now what happens? Now you're going to need more than a year's worth of emergency fund because now you got to go find another job. So you got to deal with the stress of your illness and you got to deal with the stress of the fact that you got to now find another job, right? And then what if you have medical situations around your illness that can impact your ability to work the way you was working before and you need your job to be considerate of that? So really what you need is maybe 5 years of emergency fund. Who has the financial wherewithal to do that? Right? Who do you know has a 5-year emergency fund where they don't have to work for 5 years? That's not already wealthy. That works a 9 to 5, is a career-oriented person, and they got 5 years of money sitting up. See, so because this reality is so hard, it really feels better to talk about everything else except this. But this is a reality because it happened to Bozeman. And we found out nobody could believe he was that sick because why? He was working. Why? Because he had to work. He had to. He didn't have a choice. He had to keep working, even though he was going through treatment. And then we passed away. He had a $2 million estate, but that's not enough money to where you never have to work again. Right? $2 million in California, that's not a lot of money. Not a lot of money in Georgia either. Right? And that's what I want people to understand. We have created a false reality for Americans to make them feel comfortable in this reality, to keep them going, make sure they keep paying taxes, make sure they keep participating in the economy. And then as you see people fall off because of the reality of the situation, you just supposed to hope that's not going to be you. Because we can't sit down and talk about the real issue because we don't even have the ability to understand the issue with language because we haven't been trained to. Right? We haven't even been trained to understand the issue, to even create the right language around the issue. So then what do? We talk about everything else except that issue. Right? And that's what I want people to understand. I'm going to keep throwing this stuff in people's faces until they either make, they decided it's going to keep lying to themselves or they deal with the issue. Right? Because this is real and it's happening to people. I'm going to show you somebody else, right? Some of y'all may not know who this guy is. Some of y'all may know who this guy is. This guy named Sean Bradley. He was a 7'4" basketball player, played for Philly. I think he was a #1 overall pick for the Sixers way back in the day. Played for a lot of teams. Had a long NBA career. So he was retired out of the NBA. He was living his life. And he got on his bike one day and he got hit by a car and he fell off his bike and he got paralyzed. Right? At 48 years old, he got paralyzed. He's paralyzed from mid-chest all the way down. He's paralyzed. Now, what helped him was that because he was fully vested in the NBA insurance policy through the Players Union, he was able to get care way past what a regular person could get. So he got great physical therapy way past what you would normally get with a regular insurance because he was a former NBA player, he was fully vested in their plan. He had what we call a Cadillac insurance plan. Okay. But because he's 7'4", he needs a special chair because he's 7'4". He needs a special bed because he's 7'4", right? He needs care from his wife because he can't do things for himself. And that's going to happen until he passes away. Sean Bradley was in a financial situation way different than most people because why? He played ball for so many years. So he had millions sitting up that he had already earned. And he had a really, really good insurance policy, which is way better than any insurance policy you're going to get through the private market because he's a member of a very, very strong union. But he's going to need care until he passes away. If this was to happen to a regular 9 to 5 person, they get hit on their bike, they fall, they get paralyzed. How would they get the care they need? If he wants to go to an appointment, either they have to fit a van for him or he needs somebody to come get him. Because why? He won't fit inside a regular car. He's 7'4" with the chair. So it's going to take a lot of money to keep him going for the rest of his life. That money got to come from somewhere. An emergency fund of 2 years wouldn't solve his problem because he's going to need care the rest of his life. Right? A 6-month emergency fund would not be a solution to his problem. Why? Because he's going to need care the rest of his life. The financials for his care, they have to come from somewhere. So this is why I tell people this idea that we're being told that, well, get 6 months to a year and now you're bulletproof. No, you're not. You have more money than the average person, but you're not bulletproof because anything can happen at any given time. You have a relatively young man who's an athlete. He's been in shape his whole life. He's trying to stay in shape by biking. He wasn't drunk driving. He wasn't doing anything wrong. And he's riding down the street on a bike. And I don't know how you don't see somebody 7'4" on a bike, but somebody hit him. And when he falls off the bike, he gets paralyzed. He didn't do anything to anybody. And then now the cost of his care has to come from somewhere. 6 months to a year of an emergency fund is not a solution to this guy's problem. Right? And so this is the challenge, is that because we have not been trained to have these kind of conversations, we talk about everything else and just hope we don't end up like Sean Bradley. But Sean Bradley at 25 years old, you could not have told him at 48 years old you're going to be paralyzed. Because why? I'm a great athlete. I'm making money. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. You could have never told him at 20. When you get 48, man, you're going to be paralyzed, dude. You're going to be in a chair. Right? That's going to be your life. People are like, you tripping. But this happens to people. And that's what I want people to understand. Right? When we can't have conversations about economics, but we think like the state's going to give us money, but we don't understand the economic impact of what we're asking the state to do, then we're not organized. So you can't make the state give you something if you're not organized. So then we talk about it for 5 minutes and then let's go to the hot topic of the week now. Or, how many people, and I would ask you this question. You're at work and they say, hey, we're going to talk about how we're going to increase our profit margin by 5% next quarter. And you're in that meeting. And instead of you talking about how we're going to increase our profit margin by 5% the next quarter, you say, well, you know what? What do you think about Kyrie Irving and what he's going through? That'll be the last time you're ever at that type of meeting. Why? Because you've shown you're not able to have these kind of conversations. See, this is the reason why K through 12, right? We get a semester of economics. So even when the situation is presented to you, you so much don't know how to have the conversation. You just try to figure out how to have a conversation around something around what you can do. And I think that's a problem. And so if Sean Bradley was in Canada and he was on state care, they may tell Sean Bradley, well, have you considered medically assisted AID, whatever you want to call it? Because you're going to use up a lot of dollars until you pass away, because he's just, I think, 48, 49 years old. He may live another 20 years. He's going to use up a lot of money the next 20 years. And that money has to come from somewhere. Okay? Next topic, right? We talked about before. You're just supposed to live life and hope a tragedy does not happen to you. That's how we've been conditioned in America. Right? You're just supposed to live life and hope nothing happens. And I'm not saying you're supposed to fear anything. But what I'm saying is that how do we create a safety against these tragic events happening? And then if they do happen to somebody, what resources are there for those people? Or do we just wipe them off the map? Right? Because we don't want to utilize the resources for those people. And we need to ask ourselves how we're going to deal with these situations, because one day we can be in the situation. It may not happen to everybody else. One day it may end up happening to us, or it may end up happening to somebody in our family. And then we may find out that the way the state deals with this is their attitude is, well, once you get a certain age, we just pull all resources out of you. You know, I had a member of my family get sick, and the hospital was doing everything for them. You want to know why? I worked in healthcare. I know exactly why. You want to know why? They have really good insurance. And they'll keep doing that as long as that insurance is in place. Once that insurance is no longer in place, you know what they show up and start asking you? Well, what was their end of life plan? Because why? We're not going to provide services we don't get paid for. As long as you have the insurance, they'll go above board to try to keep somebody alive. Once the insurance runs out, they will come to you and say, well, what was the end of life plan for this person? Why? Because we're not going to provide services we don't get paid for. So you want to ask yourself, how do we deal with these situations? Because why? It happens to everybody else until it happens to either you or somebody in your family. I worked in healthcare for almost a decade. I've seen this happen to a lot of people. And decisions have to be made, right? Because there's a cost associated with certain levels of care. And the money don't come out of nowhere. The money has to come from somewhere. And you can often find with your insurance company that they decide they're just going to stop paying. Now what? I knew a guy that he had a disease and he was working. And I said to him, why don't you just go on Social Security, SSD, Social Security Disability? And he said, the reason why I don't want to go on SSD is because I won't get the same kind of care that I can get through my job. Therefore, even with his disease, he was working because they would provide better care because he was a member of a union, and he would get better health care through the member of the union than he would get through SSD. And he had a disease that was not going to go away. It's just something that he gets treatment for. And he has to go in and get treatment for it. He comes back out, he goes back to work. But he knows if I let the state deal with my situation, once I get a certain age, they just stop dealing with it. There was a brother out here in ATL Metro. The county, I think Fulton County, was providing dialysis care for people that couldn't afford dialysis. And they decided that, you know what, we're just no longer going to provide the care. So then those people that are getting dialysis care through the county, they got to figure out some way to get dialysis care from, right? And either they're going to get dialysis care or they're not. And either they're going to get a kidney or they're not. But because the state is deciding whether or not you're going to get the care, they may decide one day we're no longer going to give you the care. And if you don't have the political power in the political organization to force the state to give your group the care, they're just not going to get it. Because if you need dialysis, you can't wait 2 years. You need dialysis, right? You can't wait 2 years, right? But because we're not thinking about these things now, we wait until it happens. And then now you're scrambling, trying to figure out, how am I going to get my loved one care? Because we don't have the money. They need dialysis. And we got to hope that the state says it's okay for them to get dialysis so they can stay alive, with the hope that they get a kidney transplant. Right? And that's what I want people to understand. Okay, let's go to the next one. So this is why I say being able to have pragmatic conversations around economic policy are important. And I'm going to continue to hammer that. Right? I think one of the biggest detriments that we have as a group is we can't have pragmatic conversations around economic policy. I don't have to agree with your analysis. I don't have to agree with what you say. But we can't sit down at a table and have pragmatic conversations around economic policy. We don't have an ability to. We think it's everybody else's job. We have women that think it's the job of men, right? You can make $200,000 a year as an employee and still not understand economic policy because you haven't been trained to understand it. So it's not just how much money I make, right? But this is why when you tell me, well, what happened in Uvalde was because of defunding the police, because I know how to go pull a city budget, and I can see that Uvalde police was getting 40% of the city budget. That doesn't work on me because why? I know how to pull a city budget and to see how much money the police are getting of the city budget. So then I come back with, well, I can show documentation that Uvalde police was getting 40% of the city budget. They were not getting the funded. How much of the budget do you think they should have received? So they went inside that room. Then then you having a conversation by yourself because they're realizing he's not going to bite on the defunding the police argument. He's going to come with the economic argument. See? So then they go have a conversation with somebody else that they can hot button. Because what we're gonna do is we're gonna pull the budget and we're gonna see exactly how much money they was getting because Uvalde police were not being defunded. They were getting 40% of the police budget. But because I can have a pragmatic conversation about the economic policy, right? We now go have a different conversation that many people don't want to have. And that's why I continue to try to get a small group of people to understand one of our chinks in our armor because we're extremely talented, we're extremely intelligent, but we haven't been trained to have the right conversation at the right time and understand how important that is. And understand that once you can have that conversation, people can't lie to you about it because you can actually look at the documentation and see what's what and then come back with, well, I don't understand what you're saying because it don't meet the documentation. Right? It doesn't meet the documentation. Now, we can disagree over the interpretation of the data, but what you're telling me doesn't even match the data. Right? Next thing, what I want to talk about is why this is why having pragmatic conversations around family and groups are important. Right? The man that we're talking about in this video, he's living by himself. Okay? This is why I tell people I will never co-sign this argument that being all by yourself in this society is a way to be. Why? Let's say Sean Bradley had his accident, he was all by himself. He would be spending even more money because his wife is taking care of him. Now, eventually she's going to get exhausted and they're going to have to bring people in to do it because we can't expect her to do that the rest of her life. But if Sean Bradley was a single man and this happened to him, it would be disastrous. Why? Not only would he have to deal with this, he would be all by himself trying to deal with it. He would not have anybody to advocate for him. Right? Now he has his own extended family, but once you get a certain age, a lot of the older people in your family start passing away. So if you don't have brothers and sisters, you don't have anybody. And this is why being able to have really pragmatic conversations around family and groups is important. This idea that you just get married because of it's going to improve you financially, but you're not trying to figure out how you're going to improve the group. I think it's fool's gold, but it works on the internet. It doesn't work in real life because this is a real life situation, not an internet situation. Right? If you're all by yourself in this environment and something happens to you, it can be drastic to you. Why? Because you have to manage the situation all by yourself. You don't have any help. You don't have people to advocate for you. You don't have people to look out for you. You got to figure it all out. And a lot of people are going to be led to slaughter because of that. They're going to they're going to buy these lies that they're hearing from people, and they're going to be led to slaughter because the state's going to say, well, it makes more sense for us to eliminate you out of here than to continue to spend resources to keep you here. And there's going to be nobody to advocate on your behalf. Why? Because you're all by yourself. That's why when the guy who passed away would come on YouTube and women would say, I'm just going to be single the rest of my life. And he would ask them, well, do you know how much money that's going to take for you to be single the rest of your life? It's take millions of dollars for you to be all by yourself until the day you pass away. Are you going to earn that much money the rest of your life? And you're making 40 grand a year right now. No, you won't. You're not going to retire with that kind of money. But you're believing a falsehood that's being sold to you because you think that's an independence movement. But it's really a movement that's going to make you more dependent on the state when you get older. And we know now that the state is going to just probably decide to get you up out of here because why? You're too much of a drain on the state. So whether you like that guy or not, that question was a legitimate economic question. If you're deciding that you're going to be by yourself the rest of your life, do you have the economic wherewithal to deal with tragedy? Not deal with, I'm going to travel, and no, to deal with tragedy. Because managing a situation is about managing the downside. That's one of the first rules of management, right? From the corporate level. You got to manage the downside, not the upside. Upside is easy to manage, right? So do we have enough money to deal with tragedy, to deal with long-term tragedy? Because people get sick every day. I worked in healthcare. We never had a low volume on our patient roll. and I worked in an outpatient cancer center. We was never sitting around there twiddling our thumbs. Why? Because people get cancer every day. We had a pediatric cancer center in that same building. That place was full of young children. Why? Because children get cancer every day. These things happen every day. So to believe that it's just impossible for it to be you, I'm not saying you should worry about it. I'm not saying that you should let it, put a seed inside your head. What I'm saying is that what have we done to manage the downside of the situation? And that's going to be easier to do if you're with somebody as opposed to if you're all by yourself. Because you're going to need money. You're going to need people to advocate on your behalf. And that can be difficult if you're sick. Right? And that's what I want people to understand. They're getting a bad narrative, right? Because they think that this is an empowerment movement, but in reality, it's going to make you more dependent upon the state as you get older. And we know that the state don't really care about us. It never has and it never will, right? It just doesn't. So to expect all of a sudden now for them to give us a certain level of care, I don't think that's really practical. But I'm not here to argue with people over that, right? The next thing, right? I want to tell people there's a really good movie came out a long time ago, like before the majority of us was born. It's called Logan's Run, right? And it's a movie about this society in which it's kind of like hedonistic, right? You just have sex, you party, kind of like what people are asking for now. Every day's a party, every day's a turn up, I just have sex with whoever I want to have sex with. Nothing matters. But the way the society was set up was that everybody died at 30, right? And they would have this ceremony where you would see the people get killed at 30 years old. But why did they do that? Because it took away a resource drain. They masked them out of the society to where women didn't even get pregnant. Everybody was a test tube baby. You had 0 to 30 years old. That was your lifespan. They provided everything to you from 0 to 30 years old. All the food you want, all the drink you want. You get a nice place to live, high technology. You just living a fly life, the life that everybody says they want to live now. You're living that kind of life. But the catch is you're going to die at 30 years old, right? And you got to really understand is that people are asking for this because they think this is this desired life, and they don't really understand what's going to come on the back end of it. Because in Logan's Run, there were no families. Everybody was an individual. You just live your life, right? There were no families. There was no groups. There was no clans. Everybody's just an individual. And you just live your individual life. You just live your best life. You're just a sovereign person. But the state has masterminded a structure in which, yeah, that works until you're 30. And then we kill you because after 30, you're too much of a drain on resources. So the way we keep the society going is we give you everything until you're 30, then we kill you. But we get you to accept the killing because they called it this special name and they had this ceremony. Everybody goes and watched it because why? When it's your turn, you're comfortable with it. Why? Because you've seen it happen to so many other people before you. And there was a dilemma to where one of the guys whose job it was to catch the people that didn't want to die at 30, it happened to him. And he realized, I don't want to die at 30 either. I think there's more to life than just dying at 30 years. I'm not ready to die yet. And then he had a dilemma. So that was like the plot point or the conflict of the movie. But this movie came out, I don't know, maybe 40 years ago now. But we're starting to see this now in our society. Everything's a party. I'm just an individual. I just do my own thing. Right? I don't really understand the real world I live in. I understand a fantasy world that they built for me that they told me is the real world, right? I don't know how to have a conversation around the real world I live in and how do I impact that real world? How do I build into contingencies so when things happen, I'm just living life. And you're going to see that they're going to keep giving you everything you think you want because at the end of it, they're going to literally run you off a cliff, but they're not going to tell you. And by the time you realize that they're running you off a cliff, it's going to be too late to stop. Because they have to figure out how to solve some of these problems. We're living in a society where people are living extremely to an advanced age, which is a blessing. I think people should live longer. But because of the way we set up this economic system, they're not productive past a certain age. And it's so then they're seen as a drain on the society. And the way the state is saying in Canada, we're going to solve this problem is we rather just get rid of the person. We don't want to reform our economic system. We're not going to do that. We'd rather just get rid of the person. So what's the difference between us and China? That's why when we try to say stuff to China, China says you're full of it. Why? Because they can show the United States, well, you've done the same thing that we've done to get in power. And then now we're doing the same thing that China has done in the past to stay in power. That's why when we try to say, well, China, why they just say y'all are hypocrites because y'all did the same thing that we're currently doing right now. And they're right. And that's what I want you to really start understanding. This is why I keep coming on here and telling people you need to better talk about your economic situation from a very pragmatic standpoint. And you have to figure out how to discipline yourself to have that conversation. Right. But we haven't been trained and I would call it on a cultural level within our own subgroups. We haven't made it a group norm to be able to talk about economics, not just quote Dr. Claude Anderson. For you to be able to come up with your own economic analysis, because people got analysis for everything. They can tell you what happened to Megan Thee Stallion, right? They can tell you what happened to Derrick Jackson. They can tell you what happened in this sports situation, right? But if you ask them, why do you think, right? What do you think is going to happen to the American economy if China decides not to reopen? And it'll be crickets. Well, how do you think it impacts the American economy if China does reopen and they start going full bore back into economic expansion? Crickets. Well, I'm not talking to people that got sixth grade education. I'm talking to people that graduated from college. They're gainfully employed, and they're working in our society as functional members. They're considered a functional member of our society, and they can't talk about an economic reality that's going to impact them. And that is a byproduct of their education, because Amos Wilson taught us that education is indoctrination. It's not information. You've been indoctrinated to where this stuff is not important, even though it impacts you day to day. And it can impact members of your family, right? But you've been indoctrinated to where it's not important. Everything else is more important than that. People have a million conspiracy theories around something. They still can't figure out the conspiracy to make no money, right? And they think that they know something, right? But then when you ask them, okay, let's go out here in the real world and let's build something based on what we say we know, crickets again. Right? Because their education or their indoctrination only allows them to do 1, 2, 3. Amos Wilson told us our education is designed to solve white people's problems. So once we get out of being able to solve white people's problems, we can't solve any other problems, because that is what our education is for. But we don't want to accept that, right? So then we distract ourselves from the cold reality is that is the extent of our education. We cannot solve our problems. We can only solve somebody else's problems, which is the goal of educating us in the first place, right? And that's why I keep coming on here and trying to get people to understand you have to reframe the way you look at the world, and you have to reframe the way you move in the world to be actually effective in the world. What we were taught is going to be effective will not be effective in the future. It's not even really effective now, but it definitely won't be effective in 20 years, right? We have to retrain ourselves to be effective in this new world. But it's not a popular message, and it's never going to be. But one thing people will say that have been exposed to this platform, they won't be able to say nobody didn't tell them. Right? They won't be able to say nobody tried to tell them. Right? They just be able to say, I didn't want to hear it when somebody told me to, but they won't be able to say nobody didn't try to tell them. Right? So we're going to go through the comments, man. We're going to get up on out of here. And I want to wish y'all a real good weekend, because I don't like to bum people out. That's not really my thing. But I think sometimes we need to deal with the reality of the situation that we're dealing with. I don't like to bum people out, because I'm not like a person where every time you talk to me, I want to be telling you something negative, because I don't think that's really like a good way to be, because I like to stay positive. But I think every once in a while, we need to actually deal with the reality around us. Like I said, I worked in healthcare for 10 years. I seen people literally under my care pass away. It's real life. I've seen people come in the front door healthy and come out the back door in a casket. It's real life. It's happened to members of my family. It's real. It's not going to change, right? There's one door in life you're going to have to walk through. That's called death. You can't get around it. And so to act as if it doesn't exist because I don't want to deal with it, I think is you're doing a disservice not only to your family, but you're also doing a disservice to yourself. And it's way deeper than having an emergency fund and just having a will. It's way deeper than that. And once you look at that, you will start to understand I may be economically unprepared for a tragedy. Well, why am I? I went to school. I got the education they told me to get. I got the house and the car. I kept my debt down, but I'm economically unprepared for a tragedy. So I have to now hope I never have the tragedy. I have to pray that God never puts that tragedy in my life as a test, because I may not be able to deal with it, not only psychologically, but also financially. So I have to hope that it's never me. But it does happen to people, because it happened to Sean Bradley. That guy was a millionaire. You understand what I'm trying to tell you? And that's what happened to Boswick. And Boswick Chadwick was moving towards the top of his career. The man died at what, 39? When he died at early 40s. He was at the top of his career. He was getting ready to start making real money, and he passed away. Right? You got to understand that these things do happen to people. But because of our education, which is really our indoctrination, to only be able to solve somebody else's problems, which is the goal of a colonial state, is to produce subjects to support the colonial state. They're never supposed to be able to build on their own. That's the goal of a colonial or a corporate state, to only create people that can support the goals of the corporate state. They're never going to be able to do things around their own goals. So when you ask them, what are your own goals? Crickets. What are your objectives? What are your initiatives? Crickets. I don't know. I only know what the initiatives or the goals are of the corporate state. That is a problem. I'm not saying that you should participate in society. I'm saying it is a problem where all you can do is know how to solve the problems of another group of people, and you amongst your own personal groups can't figure out how to solve your own group's problems. Right? Let's get these comments and we're going to get up and out of here.